Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 10, and my name is Janet Szabo. I will be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I have a special episode today. It's my first interview episode. I've been hoping to do some interviews, but I had to get a few tech things in place. And I interviewed a friend of mine because I've decided that interviewing a friend would be a little less nerve-wracking than interviewing a stranger. And my friend, JC Briar, agreed to be my test interviewee for my first interview episode. So we'll be hearing from her a little bit later. JC and I have known each other for over 20 years. She was the tech editor for my cabling newsletter when I published Twists and Turns from 2000 to 2010. And she was also the tech editor for my book Aaron's Sweater Design and my book Cables Volume 1. So we have a long history. We both love knitting, and I thought it would be interesting to talk to JC because she started out as a computer programmer, moved into the world of knitting, and recently she has gone from knitting into sewing. And she does improv quilting, which I find fascinating, even though I have absolutely no desire to do it. And I've been following her on her Instagram account and seeing all of the cool things that she's been doing. She also does all of her quilt piecing on an old treadle, a vintage Singer treadle sewing machine. So we'll hear from her about that too. I have a few other interviews in the works. This past weekend, we butchered chickens. I live on a farm. My food doesn't come from the grocery store, not all of it. Some of my food grows in my backyard. And every fall, typically when it gets cool, we schedule a Saturday butchering date. And a friend of ours comes down and helps us. Either he brings his own chickens or we give him some of ours to thank him for helping us out. And our neighbor across the street came over with her 8-year-old son. And my friend Tara's husband came over with 5 of their chickens because he wanted to see our setup and see how we did everything. So while Kurt and I were plucking chickens, we talked a little bit about their new project, and I'm hoping to get them on the show in a couple of weeks to do an interview. He and Tara just bought a woolen mill. They actually didn't buy a building. They bought the machinery, and it's in an existing building that they own. But they bought the machinery to card and spin yarn and prepare roving for spinning. So that's just so cool. Tara and I have been friends for a long time too. Our daughters went to school together. We like to travel together. When our kids were in high school, we went to Europe on a National Honor Society trip, and she and I roomed together. We knitted through Eastern Europe on the bus, and ever since then, we try to get together periodically and go somewhere. She was my travel companion to Sew Expo last March. She lives here in town and quilts and sews and spins and knits and does all the things. My husband laughs and says that we shouldn't be allowed to play together because we get into trouble. So be looking for that in a couple of weeks. I'm hoping to get them on the show too. That'll be an interesting conversation. What am I sewing? Well, I had a day last week when I started out like a house on fire, and I cut out a laundry day tee, a Harper cardigan. I have a pattern for a hoodie sweatshirt. It's Berta 6315. I cut out one of those. I may have cut out another laundry day tee. I can't remember. And then Berta 6329, which is a new pattern to me that I picked up a few months ago. It's a raglan knit top with pleats at the neckline. And I made up a muslin of that pattern, but the shoulders had darts in them. And I know that raglan patterns for woven fabrics typically do have darts in the shoulders because You need the extra room in there to be able to move your arms around. But I thought the darts in a knit pattern were kind of unnecessary, and I didn't like the way they were laying funny on my shoulder when I finished the top. So I decided that I would redraft the top of the raglan sleeve and take the darts out. So I did that and I ran up a muslin, but I have really broad shoulders. And even with redrafting the shoulder part of the raglan sleeve, I ended up having to go back and do a broad shoulder adjustment because the sleeves on my muslin were just a little bit too tight and they were pulling. So I did that, and I am delighted with the way that came out. So now I have another pattern to put on my tried and true pile. I seem to have really good success with Berta patterns for some reason. People have mixed feelings about them, but I've always had good success with the way they fit. And even though the instructions tend to be a little bit brief, I still manage to make things from them. So I'm not entirely sure how much sewing I'll be able to get done this week. Our church is hosting our annual International Gift Festival. We have a sale every fall where we carry handmade items from artisans around the world, and that will be this weekend, and I'll be working there. Next week, I'm supposed to be teaching a Lark Tea class down in Missoula, and then a pants class in Spokane at the end of next week, but I need to contact the stores and see if anyone has signed up for those classes. The day after tomorrow, here on Wednesday, I'll be teaching a decorative cover stitch class at the quilt store here in town. And I have one more class, I think, scheduled in December down in Missoula. And I think that's going to be it for 2023. So I will start lining out my schedule for 2024 in terms of classes, and I'll make sure that I put that on the website. So without further ado, let's get to my interview with JC Briar. I am here today with JC Briar. JC is a knitting designer and teacher, the author of the book Charts Made Simple, the mastermind behind Stitch Map's charting software, and now a sewist and quilter. And I have known JC for over 20 years.
No.
Yes,
Really?
I know, yes.
Yeah.
You were my technical editor for Twists and Turns, my cabling newsletter, and I started that in 2000. And then you were my technical editor for my books, for Aaron Sweater Design and my cables book. So it has been over 20 years, yes.
Yeah, I started tech editing for you in 2002. That's right. Wow.
And you came to me via Joan Schrouder. I remember that.
I remember it differently. I remember you put an ad out somewhere and I responded to that ad, but Joan probably put a good word in for me because she did that left, right, and center.
I think she did. Yes.
Yeah.
You came well, highly recommended. So let's go back. Let's go back probably 25 years and tell me how you transitioned from you were a computer programmer and you
I was.
transitioned to being a knitter.
I transitioned to being a knitter after the dot-com bust that happened after 9/11. So 9/11 happened, there was a dot-com bust going on, and the company that I'd been working for about 7 years slowly started laying people off for the first time in its history. One quarter they laid off a few people, the next quarter they laid off a few more, and then in the fall, I guess it would have been the fall of 2002, they let off a large number of people, and I was one of them. I was plenty happy to go at that point. I have no idea really what I wanted to do at that point, but I was pretty sick and tired of writing software in a corporate environment. And then quite literally, I saw your ad for a tech editor and I thought, that's something I can do. And I was surprised by how similar tech editing turned out to be, like debugging code, running through the instructions in my head. And it's like, is it really going to do what it thinks it's going to do? It was exactly the same skill. And then from there, what else? I guess I tried doing a little bit of designing, selling designs to magazines. That didn't pay well. It wasn't really my cup of tea. And I also at about that time started teaching locally. And getting back to Joan Schroeder, Joan nudged me to continue to apply to teach at various other venues. And eventually she twisted my arm to the point where I was teaching for Stitches events. And that started, I guess, in 2007 was the first time I taught for Stitches. Yeah, just snowballed from there.
And you and I went on an Alaskan knitting cruise in 2009.
Yep.
And
I started in
together
Seattle.
there.
Yep. And that was the first time we'd met, which was funny because by that time we had been working together for years. And I don't think we'd even spoken on the phone.
No, we were internet friends, but that was it.
Yeah. A lot of email going back and forth.
So obviously when the pandemic happened, Stitches wasn't happening. You weren't teaching anymore, or had you stopped teaching by then?
I was, I had the thought in the back of my mind when the pandemic started that maybe I was getting about done with pandemic. Really finished things off for me. I taught a couple of times in the fall of 2000. Stitches started doing this Stitches at Home virtual events. And I discovered pretty quickly that I didn't really care for teaching by Zoom. I really much preferred teaching in person because I wanted to be able to look over people's shoulders. I wanted to be able to give them one-on-one advice. And it's really hard to do that through Zoom. And
Yes.
it just wasn't a skill that I wanted to develop. And it wasn't, I was, like I said, pretty much done with teaching before the pandemic hit anyway. So it's like, I'm done. I'm just done.
And in the meantime, you had also written Charts Made Simple.
That came out in 2010. Yeah, a little book that tries to explain everything anybody would ever want to know about how to read a chart. And I'm happy to say that it did pretty well. I'm enjoying right now. It's still available on Amazon through the magic of print on demand. So it's kind of nice to have done that work all those years ago and know that people can still get their hands on that book if they want to.
I've given out several copies. It's an awesome little book.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I suspect that part of the reason that you went on to develop stitch maps is because of your frustration.
Oh, big time.
With
Yeah.
tech editing my newsletter when I was using a
No,
grid-based
not
charting
that.
system.
No, hardly. Writing, drawing charts for your newsletter, editing your newsletter, that was great. That was fine. I enjoyed that work. I even enjoyed drawing the schematics, you may recall. But
Yes.
what I had frustration with was trying to depict not so much cables, but lace. Lace does not depict well in a traditional grid-based chart. And there's actually a page, the one page in Charts Made Simple that makes me cringe, where I have to explain that sometimes things don't, you can't really tell what the chart is showing you when it comes to lace. And it really bothered me to have to put that in there because even then, even as I was writing Charts Made Simple, I knew that there was another way of depicting lace. That if you simply took a blank piece of paper and a pencil and started drawing out your pattern using symbols that connected to each other from one row to the next, you could see what was happening in a much, much better way. And I really liked the idea of being able to draw charts without these grids, but doing it pencil and paper was tedious and it was error prone and they were really sloppy looking. I have since found that other people have done this as well. They have tried to draw charts on paper in order to understand lace. And the fact that I wanted to share this with other people is why I wrote the software. I wanted to see if I could write software that would make stitch maps pretty, that would take these grid-free charts and make them readable and something that you could share with other people. And so I worked on that project for a number of months before the website went live. And it was gratifying to see that there are some knitters out there for whom stitch maps just made immediate sense. And some knitters for whom grid-based charts never made sense. And they said, stitch maps, these make sense to me. These let me see what's happening. For lace and any other pattern where there are increases and decreases. The increases and decreases are not well depicted when you've got this grid that's forcing things into an alignment that really isn't there in the fabric. So yeah, it was a frustration with the limitation of grid-based charts that made me decide to write stitch map software.
So I shouldn't feel responsible.
No, by no means. Because cables actually do depict well in a grid-based chart, unless we're talking about, some really funny pattern where, again, increases and decreases are involved as well.
I'm thinking back to those, we called them infinite cables, I think, or Barbara Walker called them infinite cables.
Yeah.
The ones where you did have, all of a sudden you had 5 increases in one stitch, and trying to make that make sense, and lots of black squares where there was no
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That would be the one case where having a stitch map would make more sense for a cabled pattern than a grid-based chart would. Because with a stitch map, there's no need for a no stitch symbol, those black squares you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need because there's no squares anywhere. And simply every symbol points to the symbols in the row below where it's worked. So you can see how the infinite cable, whatever you want to call it, grows out of a series of increases and then later disappears in a series of decreases without any of those black squares or no stitch symbols. It's why I added the cable symbols to the Stitch Maps website. I wanted to make sure that people could depict that sort of thing. And if I recall, when I announced that the cable symbols were available on the site, I used some of the patterns out of your book to show people this is why this is awesome.
So how many there's a library of stitches in Stitch Maps, isn't there?
Yeah, close to 10,000 publicly available stitch patterns.
Wow.
And probably nearly as many that are people keep private or hidden. So that if you have a subscription to the website, and the website does support itself through subscriptions, not advertising. If you've got a subscription, you can set the visibility of the stitch patterns that you add to the website. So about half of the stitch patterns are not visible unless you have, special access, unless they're your patterns. But yeah, close to, I think it's about 10,000 publicly available patterns nowadays. Most of them, well, a large portion of them are a little weird because there's no gatekeeper on the website. Anybody can sign up for an account. All I need is a valid email address so I know how to get in touch with you if something goes screwy. You sign up for an account and you can enter in the written instructions for a stitch pattern and we'll draw the stitch map for you. So people use the site in order to understand their stitch patterns and also just to try things out, just to see what happens if I do this. And sometimes those experiments are a little odd.
So I have a question. How do stitch maps, they're for knitting, but I know that Lily Chin always used to talk about crochet charts.
Uh-huh.
Does stitch maps lend itself to crochet charts at all, or am I
stitch maps are very similar to crochet charts in the same sense of, again, every symbol indicates a stitch and it points to the place where you should work it from the stitches in the row below. But the Stitch Maps website right now only understands knitting. Okay. It does not understand crochet. So somebody who is familiar with crochet charts and familiar with knitting will look at a stitch map and say, oh, that makes perfect sense. But the site itself cannot, at this time, draw crochet charts.
In your spare time, you can do that, right?
Oh, in my spare time, yes, my copious spare time.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I follow you on Instagram, and all of a sudden you were quilting, and which I thought was great because I went from knitting to quilting too. But you are doing quite different quilting than I do. You do.
Yes.
And that has been really fascinating to me. It's nothing that I ever want to do, but so how did you end up going from knitting to quilting?
And getting back to the how you and I quilt differently, the kind of quilting that you do is not the kind that I would want to do. So it's great that there's options for everybody, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
I had been interested in quilting for a long time. I mean, I have vague memories of as a kid making a pot holder for my mom that had, like a pinwheel quilt block on it or something like that. But I hadn't done a lot of sewing or quilting when I was spending a lot of time knitting. And you know what it's like to be a traveling knitting teacher. You're always putting together new classes, new class samples, new material to put in your blog or your newsletter or whatever. I had spent so much time knitting, knitting, knitting. I didn't really have time left over for quilting until the pandemic hit. So the pandemic hits, I'm not teaching anymore. There's no need to be developing new classes. And I started, playing around with quilting a little bit in 2020, but things really got going for me as a quilter in the summer of 2021 when I bought a treadle sewing machine. I'd been using an old white that I probably bought like 25 years ago, and it's a perfectly capable machine. It's just that I didn't like it. I never liked how there was a little bit of delay when you press on the foot pedal and the motor gets into action, and then all of a sudden it's sewing faster than I want. With the treadle, I have absolute perfect control over the speed that the machine is going. And it's a simple machine. It's something that I can easily maintain myself, after watching a few YouTube videos. So I just dearly love this 1924 Singer 66 treadle machine that I have named Rosebud. Rosebud will be 100 years old next April-ish. And I really enjoyed sewing on her. And so I got more into quilting after I got the treadle. And then a couple of other things happened at more or less the same time. There was a 30 days quilt along, 30 days of improv quilt along, hosted by Shannon Fraser and Broadcloth Studios. I think they've done this like 3 years now through Instagram. And I participated in this quilt along, improv quilt along in 2021, which I found a good deal of fun. Some of the blocks I didn't care for, but put together a quilt top anyway. It's like, whoa, that was fun. That was just taking scraps and throwing them together and, look what happens. Isn't that interesting? I also had been reading about improv quilters and modern quilters, reading various books and being inspired by what I saw. I remember from learning about Gwen Marsden from Lucy Neepy and being intrigued by that sort of free form approach to quilting, putting together blocks. But then I started reading more and more about other modern quilters who work in a much more improv fashion. It's not just simply a matter of putting away the rotary cutter and the ruler, but instead putting away the notion of what a block is and just put things on the design wall and figure out how to sew them together. It's kind of in one way of describing improv quilting to me anyway. So a book that I found really inspirational was Sherilyn Wood's The Improv Handbook for Modern Quilters. And she's got a series of different, what she calls scores, different ways of approaching a specific style of improv quilt at the beginning of the book. And at the end of the book, this gets to my technical side. At the end of the book, she had a how-to section that talked about various techniques for working in an improv fashion. How to take two pieces of fabric that aren't the same size and sew them together. How to sew along a curve, what to do when the curve doesn't lay flat, things like that. So I got into quilting in part because I got a treadle machine at a time when I had spare time on my hands, and in part because I was being inspired by all of these modern and improv quilts that I saw. Long answer to a short question.
No, that's great. So, do you like to piece more than you like to quilt? Do you like to do both? Do you what?
I think it's fair to say that I like the piecing better. I really admire people who can do excellent free motion quilting. And I just haven't had enough practice at it yet to feel that I'm any good at it. I would like to get good at it. I would like to be able to emulate those people that I can see doing really cool things with their free motion quilting. But I'm not there yet. So at this point, when I need to quilt something on a long arm machine, I borrow a friend's machine, and just just having to go to somebody else's house and borrow their machine makes it more of an affair than it ought to be. If I had room in my house, you've seen how small my house is. If I had room in my house for a machine like that, I would probably spend more time quilting and really enjoying it. But my sewing corner is just a tiny little corner of my bedroom. And so I've got this little nest essentially where I've got my treadle machine, I've got a table where I can set up a small pressing mat and a cutting mat, and I've got a wall where I've got my design wall, and it's all in this one tiny little corner, and that's all I need to piece whatever comes to my mind. And so the piecing is something that, because of my setup, is easier to spend a lot of time on, and I really do enjoy it. I enjoy the challenge of, okay, I've got this idea, how do I put it together? And
So
yeah, that really turns my crank.
can you talk about the one you've been posting on Instagram lately?
You've been talking the apple core
The
pieces.
apple core pieces, yes.
Yeah, so I don't know where the inspiration, I think I probably found the inspiration for that on Instagram. I saw somebody else had taken the apple core shape and was, like string piecing apple cores and then sewing together. And it's like, I want to be able to do that. So ironically, even though I really like improv quilting, I also like the precision of foundation piecing. And so could I design a template for an apple core shape where I could have the nice regular stripes on the apple core and then still manage to sew those curved edges together? So those are the experiments that I've been playing with for the last week or so, and been posting about on Instagram. It turned out to be a lot of fun to study in detail what's involved in creating a successful foundation piecing template, and how to use it appropriately so that in the end you wind up with, again, something that lays flat. And this is another example of something that just appeals to me because it appeals to my technical side. It's really great to be able to just get out your rotary cutter and slice up some curves and get it to lay kind of flat and hope that it'll look okay after it's quilted. But I like to create tops that are flat, and I like that challenge. And so learning to sew curves either after creating a template or just freehand that will lay flat, that is something that has really turned my crank in the last couple of years.
You will not be surprised to know that I do not like foundation piecing.
No, I know that you've talked about this before, about getting confused which way does something go. I
Yes.
will say that the apple core template is actually fairly simple because you're just adding, one stripe after another. And so it's a
Oh,
little harder to get lost.
that might be more my speed.
Yeah, but creating the template such that after you've sewn the unit together, get each of the apple core units to fit together with each other, that turned out to be interesting because as I was sewing the units, I found that they had shrunk a little bit. Now that I know that, it's like, okay, well, it's obvious. You take the improv quilter approach of building your units a little bit bigger than you need them and then trimming them down to size so that you can fit them together. And man, oh man, do I love that approach.
That's cool. Do you sew anything besides piecing quilts?
I do. I've sewn a number of bags and wallets and zip totes and things like that. I actually sewed a carry case for a featherweight sewing machine. I got a featherweight at an estate sale, and I wanted to be able to carry it around because, again, you cannot take a treadle somewhere, and I'm not really all that fond of my modern electric white machine. So I wanted to carry the featherweight in something. It didn't come with a case, and I wasn't about to spend $100 on eBay to buy a case. So it's like, well, I can make one, and it was a real pain in the butt. From the standpoint that I was using denim and twill and really thick fusible interfacing, and it was just difficult to sew, just physically difficult to get everything to come together in the end. But it's a talking piece now. When I pull that case out at an event, it's like, whoa. It's got all the little pockets so I can keep all the doodads that go with the featherweight. Yeah, I love it.
Are you teaching sewing at all, or do you think you will? Or
I don't think I will, but that said, I have agreed. I'm a member of my local chapter of the Modern Quilt Guild, and I have agreed to help local guild members with their curve sewing at a sew day that we're going to have coming up. Once a month, our guild has a sew day at a fabulous facility where there are tables and light and electrical outlets, and it's just a great place where we hang out for like 6 hours together. And for the most part, people work on whatever they want to work on. And I've agreed to be available to people at that meeting to show them how I sew curves and how they can be happy sewing their curves.
be happy sewing your curves.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, it's possible. I don't understand why so many quilters are afraid of curves, because you do a few of them, you get some practice, you learn a few tricks, and they're fun. Then
They
they're
are
fun.
fun.
Yeah.
I've done a drunkard's path, and they are fun.
Well, see, now that's where you and I differ, because I've got a drunkard's path template, and I sewed together a few blocks. And once I followed the template and created the blocks, it's like, okay, I did that. I don't want to make an
Well, there
entire
was no
quilt top.
challenge there.
No, the challenge, the puzzle to solve disappeared. And I think that's why traditional quilting doesn't hold a lot of appeal to me, because it's the same block over and over again. And after I've done a few of them, it's like, I'm bored. Let's go on to something else.
Your leaf
But
improv quilting is very cool too.
I've had fun with those. I've got at least 3 more ideas coming down the pipe. But I also have on my design wall as we speak, 1 table runner top that's finished and needs to be quilted, and 3 partial tops that need to be finished. So I have to clean off my design wall before I can sew another leaf quilt.
You're so disciplined.
No, no. If I were disciplined, I wouldn't have 3 unfinished tops on my design wall. And again, it's in a corner of my bedroom. So the first thing I wake up in the morning, it's like, oh, that's still not done. The pixies didn't come finish it in the middle of the night.
Do you think that space constraints make you more creative?
They certainly have made me creative when it comes to organizing what space that I do have and making sure that I can fit in the fabric and the tools that I want. It's kept me from buying unnecessary tools. Yeah, but I think that in terms of creativity, I get it from looking at what other people have done and trying to figure out, well, how could I do something like that myself?
Or even take it a step further?
Yeah, we're working on that. I still kind of consider myself as a newish quilter, and there's a lot of things I want to play with and explore before deciding, well, this is what I'm gonna, really excel at. Um, yeah, there's so much to explore yet. Although I do know that I really like curves.
So what do you think will be coming down the pike in the future?
In terms of my quilting or quilting in general?
In terms of your quilting?
Well, first, like I said, I got to get a few things off the design wall. There's a leaf quilt that I probably should do soonish. My guild chapter is hoping to submit a series of quilts to the Sisters Outdoor Quilt Show
Mhm.
next July. And as a group, we have chosen for the theme, a challenge within our own guild. The theme is going to be your quilt has to be mostly green and have a whole bunch of curves in it. It's like, well, that sounds like a leaf quilt to me. Yeah, so I think that's once I finish up with the projects that are currently taking up space on the design wall, that's going to be the next one coming up.
Do you still knit?
A little bit, but not a whole lot. I've played in the past few months in the evening, if I needed something to do with my hands, I've done a little bit of crocheting, and I found a knitting project that had been languishing for years. Um, but apparently I get bored really easily. I've gotten 98% of a scarf done and, and I did a few rows on this knitting project that I found, and it's like, yeah, I don't feel like working on that either. I'm not doing a whole lot with yarn. No.
How about other fiber arts? Are there things that you want to try?
I would like to try inkle leaving and in particular to do card weaving.
Uh-huh.
So I've become a bit of an estate sale junkie in the last couple of years. I find all sorts of quilty tools and fabric and such like at estate sales. And I also found a set of cards for doing card weaving at an estate sale. So yeah, I just got to find the inkle loom next, and I'll start playing with that.
You just put
Because
it out there.
so it's not a matter of discipline or anything like that. It's a matter of being cheap. I don't want to spend $120 on a brand new inkle loom when I know eventually at some point I'll come across one at an estate sale or garage sale or something like that.
Yeah, and the universe just heard you, so
Yeah, let's hope so. Give me a nice little inkle loom to play with, and I'll have some fun with that.
there you go. Well, it has been wonderful talking to you. I wish we could get together in person. We need to do that one of these days.
We do. It's you do a lot of road trips, me not so much, but we'll have to figure something out.
Okay. Well, if people want to know more about you and what you're doing, how can they find you?
I think the best way right now is to look me up on Instagram. Instagram JC.Briar. There's somebody out there who got JC Briar before I did, but JC.Briar on Instagram is going to be your best way to keep tabs on what I'm up to.
Any books in the works, do you think? Maybe on improv quilting?
No. I'm doing this for fun now. I
Okay.
truly am. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. Like I said, I'm going to be helping people with curves at my local guild's sew day in a couple of weeks. We'll see how that goes, but I don't feel inclined to teach the way I used to put together the 10-page class handout and have, 6 different samples to show people and be prepared for every minute of class. No, this is going to be a lot more laid back. And I
Okay.
kind of like it that way now.
I was going to suggest that maybe next year you submit some class proposals to Sew Expo.
I think it would be better maybe if I just went and looked around and had some fun as a civilian.
Okay.
Actually, I actually did that a couple of weeks ago and went to the Pacific International Quilt Festival in Santa Clara, and that was a lot of fun. There were hundreds of quilts of all sorts. So, everything from traditional to way modern out there art quilts. And there were vendors. It was a lot of fun to just wander around as a civilian, take things in, find inspiration for different things. Yeah, I enjoyed it. And it was bizarre because it was in the same convention center where I had taught for Stitches West for years and years and years. So I knew where all the ladies' rooms were. I knew where all the restaurants were. I could find my way around.
That's funny. Yeah, it
It
does.
was. It was.
It does. There is some cross pollination, I think, that happens.
When you go to events.
Yeah,
Yeah, oh yeah.
definitely. Well, it has been great talking to you, and I appreciate your willingness to be my first interviewee.
It's an honor.
So hopefully we'll get together soon.
Yay!
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed meeting JC and learning more about her quilting. You can check her out on Instagram at jc.briar. You can also go to her website, which is jcbriar.com, for additional information on her book, Charts Made Simple, and the Stitch Map software. As always, you can go to my website at janetzabo.com for more information about my activities. I would like to thank the people who have left reviews on iTunes for the podcast. Thank you. That will help other people find me. Please feel free to share the podcast with friends of yours. I'm always willing to grow the audience and keep talking about things as long as I have listeners. That's it for this week, and I hope you go get to sew something.